So Chris, I'm going to share screen and then let you run my slides again.
Sounds good. I'm going to actually try video today. I'm feeling good about the stability of my Wi-Fi, so I'll start out. Yeah, I know. I'll start out with video, and then if things go wrong, then I'll just hop off. Awesome. Yeah, that was a great conversation. Shannon, for sure, stick around and at the very least heckle, because that's always good. It keeps things spicy.
Got it.
So in about 30 minutes, we're going to traipse over the top of a lot of stuff that could go a lot deeper, and it dovetails actually pretty nicely with the last conversations that we've been having today.
Chris, you have talking about. Chris,
do I have mouse control?
Mouse control. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Yep, there's me. And so we're going to be talking about how do we make the how do we start thinking through differences in there we go. Differences in how we choose resources, how we identify them, where do we place them within the context of the learning design and the task at hand in terms of creating experiences for learners. And this actually applies, as Shannon was talking about things, this actually applies to adult learning as well, which is fantastic, because then we're starting to close the gaps and tie the red line between all of the things. So really today we're going to go through a little bit of the dictionary. We're going to start talking about some standards and a model for learning design, and we're going to skip over the top of those. If you haven't downloaded the dictionary already, definitely do that, because it's going to be a good guidebook as we go through this. But really the conversation and the purpose behind all this is to be able to maximize the resources that we have, and to make sure that we're creating learner-centric types of designs. So a little bit of background before I get into the next slide. I was an assistant superintendent, a chief academic officer. We had a fairly mid to large size system in the state of Washington, moved into all of these things that we've been talking about for 10 years at a point where they were called initiatives versus requirements, which is the difference now. And so it's been a lot of fun, but it's been also fascinating to watch the industry shift and change as we go. So what we're going to start out with here, as long as my mouse control works, there we go, is really a digital curriculum characteristic scale. And this was designed by the Learning Council in 2015-ish. And it's designed for a purpose, and the purpose is to help people to understand what the bits and pieces of Lego are that you're going to be using to design an experience, a learning experience, so that you can start to move up a sophistication scale when you're choosing resources. And so this is important to understand, because you want to be moving into the utility of higher sophistication learning objects, because it's more engaging and it's more sticky. So as you're looking at this slide, on the very left-hand side, down at the bottom of the scale is the digital document, and this is a Google Doc, or it's a Word doc. It's static. It doesn't do a lot. It doesn't interact. It's not built into a system. It may be proprietary. It might be a paragraph of text. It might be something that you Googled. And again, it's not very sophisticated, because it doesn't create any interaction and there's no activity. It's also pretty labor intensive when it comes to teacher time creating things with those discrete objects, because then you have to go find them. They're not contextualized. They're not connected to anything. You move up that sophistication scale into single loop animations, and this is like things flying in on your PowerPoint slides, or spinning, or appearing, or whatever the low level animation is that you've built into some things. It's moving up there in terms of engagement and interest, but it's really not. It's not doing anything. It's not causing interaction. When we move into video, however, these learning objects that are based in video, this would be like a teacher recording, or a student even recording some information or discussion about some things. This is really the first time that the learner has the ability to sort of modulate the experience. They can pause, they can fast forward, they can rewind. they can start to navigate within that experience, and that's pretty sophisticated, right? That's at least allowing them the agency to start controlling their learning path, although it's very rudimentary. But we start moving up the scale then into collections, and this is where we see collections being contextualized, and you've got discrete pieces of information now being combined and mushed together into something that approximates some sense and some context. And it also then provides some navigation, and you can search through these things. You can start to move and choose. You have some additional level of agency within your experience. And so if you've used any of those up until video, you've just been using sort of static one-dimensional types of building blocks for your experience. There's a line right there in the center of that graphic, and that moves from needing more instructional planning time to using more automation in the learning experience. And that's critical because at the feedback level, we start to move into allowing the machines to do what they're designed to do. And the whole idea around technology is to be able to allow the humans to be more human, and to take off of their plate a lot of stuff that machines can do, and they just can. And it's not removing the human, it's actually helping the human to be more human and do more with their time. So the feedback level is the point at which that's sort of the tipping point for sophistication, because now all of a sudden the learning object is actually forcing interaction or causing interaction with the learner. It's answering questions. It's giving the learner feedback on what they're doing, and that takes some sophistication in the learning object, and that's then a much stronger building block than any of the previous ones before, because now we're starting to be immersive in the experience. Moving up into the coding layer that's listed here is really fairly basic, right? This is a WordPress website where I've created sort of an experience or a world for my learners. They can navigate through that. They can make selections and choices. It's fairly high in the student agency scale in terms of a learning object. It's portable. I can get to it from a bunch of different places. It's agnostic in terms of platform. So it really provides a lot of flexibility and control, and it really does create a much richer experience for the learner. And then we move up into this sort of magical realm up there at the top, and this is where we get very highly designed resources, and this is where the architecture is designed around machine learning and AI and a lot of the other powerful tools that help to learn the learner. In the last conversation, we had some discussion about teachers' job knowing the learner, and in my experience as a coach, I would always say your number one job is to learn the learner. That's your job as a teacher. And so if I can leverage some technology tools to help me do that and to create a much richer experience, I'm all about it. And I should be planning in that way, and I should be designing using tools that do that. So hold this in your brain, because we're going to layer on another piece. So the next piece on top of this that we want to layer on is really another learning object scale. And this one is, again, it's not brand new. It shows up in the special report that's thumbnailed over there. You can download that from the Learning Council website. But this one starts to layer on top concepts of granularity. And so in the same way that the last graphic went through sort of a sophistication scale, this one really starts to think about, well, how granular are these pieces, and how are they contextualized within larger worlds and experiences? And so at the very top, you look at the concept level, and this is all thinking through what content might be in with that object. And so the concept layer, for example, is a discrete piece of information. It's similar to the lowest level of sophistication in the previous slide. And this is a scrap of an old textbook. It's a paragraph that you Googled. It's a couple of sentences from another piece, from an article somewhere. And again, it doesn't do anything. It's not contextualized. It's discrete. It doesn't do a whole lot. And then you move up the scale through contextualization, where you're now collecting those things and you're putting them into, you're helping to make meaning with them, and you're putting them together with other linked ideas and content. And then you're moving up into ebooks and courses, which actually layer on another level of contextualization and ability. And yet all of those are fairly low level authorware sort of sophistication objects, and that until you get up into more professionally coded objects, and even at that, there are sophistication levels or aggregation levels. And so you think about what's in the green box down there as sort of the scale of learning objects that are professionally coded, going from short form to long form. And as we've seen in the amateur authorware sort of end, they go from short form, which would be the applet or app, having a discrete function. It might be like a math app. It might be spelling. It might be something very discrete, not connected. Has maybe a couple of levels, but really not. And it does what it does, and that's it. And that's fine, and it serves its purpose. But again, it's really sort of at the low end of sophistication, and it really, if you're building with that, you're going to start creating some dead ends. And so it's important to understand as you start selecting what those things do. So we move up into courses and courseware, and this is where you have a much more immersive experience, collections as well. And as we move all the way up to the top, that it represents the long form types of professionally coded objects, learning objects, and that's where you see the learning engines. You see machine learning. You see some predictive ability. You see a lot more AI being applied, or concepts of AI that helps you to know the learner. But it also means that the machine is going to start knowing the learner and helping the learner to navigate through their path. So this is important to know and to layer on, because now we're talking about not just types of resources in terms of sophistication, but now what other types of learning objects are there that I need to be mindful of and understand as I'm starting to build this ecosystem of resources that are going to allow me to more accurately personalize. And that's the goal, right? That's where we're all headed. So I'm gonna step back a moment from scales to identify, and I'm going to step into this graphic, which is pivotal in terms of understanding where we are. And we've been talking about digital load. We've been talking about sort of this sea of things that are sort of swirling around people now as they've been tossed into the deep end on needing to shift over to digital, and not just digitized, right? And so this was actually a pivotal piece of work by the Learning Council, sort of back in the beginning of when people were starting to buy up stuff, and you would start to see dashboards and SSO dashboards that had just a ton of stuff out there, and probably all great, and probably all asked for by teachers, and probably vetted, or it maybe by the curriculum department if there was one. And yet all of a sudden we have all this stuff, and if I can draw your attention to the stair-stepped portion of this graphic, that really sort of represents a load that was identified, because by grade level in a lot of systems, things are changing and shifting, and now all of a sudden, in addition to designing learning, you're needing to design learning with new tools, and some of those make sense and are useful and have the flexibility to design with, and some are not. And how do you get through that? That's what that was a weight that was weighing heavily on a lot of teachers, and I felt it at the very beginning of things back when I was in the classroom. We were starting to feel something different, and it was hard for people to put their finger on it. And so through a lot of research and conversation with educators, the Learning Council identified that, and then they said, okay, now what do we do? Now now that we've identified the problem, now how do we define the fix and start moving toward a solution? And what was identified as the gap is actually a logistics layer. And so what we needed was the air traffic control. What we needed was some routing capability and some logistics, and the ability then to help humans move through this digital ecosystem successfully and effectively. that was big. That was a big deal, because now as we talk about personalization and layering coaching and layering and an LMS, if you're even ready for that, and layering in all the other apps that you may or may not be vetting for efficacy, how do you move around that? We need to have a model for that, and we need to have a model that's going to help us to design with it. So that's an important piece to recognize. All of that is context for now needing to define some terminology and come forward with some common language and vocabulary. And so the EduJedi dictionary started out with probably 150 definitions, and we're probably well over 200 at this point. But it's a work in progress, and it was designed really to give people some common understanding and vocabulary, so that as you're identifying resources and evaluating those, that exactly what you're talking about, so that you can avoid some pitfalls. So the categories that we're going to look at here, I'll just go over very briefly, and you can go through them in depth later on. The actions are really the functions of the code, that they do things. It's what the code does and what the app is designed to do, not necessarily involved with other processes. Design really talks through aesthetics, navigation, interoperability, user onboarding, things like that, accessibility, engagement strategies. Those are all covered in design. Controls are important because this allows you flexibility, and this is that category starts thinking through what do I mean when I say administrative capabilities, and why is this important? It is because you need the ability to flex with those things. Customization, another one, very, very closely tied, really speaks to supports and characteristics of resources that support personalization, right, or individualization. And so being clear, as sort of a segue from our last conversation about personalization and defining that, right? When we're talking about individualization, we're talking about decisions that educators are making for the learners. And if we're talking about personalization, we're referring to models where the learners have options and have agency, or the opportunity to exercise agency to decide what models or materials or methods are going to be most effective for them in their experience. And that's important to understand a distinction between the instruction. Go ahead,
Chris. I just wanted to say, I think that's a great distinction. And I love the idea of, essentially clarifying, here's the vocabulary that we're talking about, and here's how we can, be on the same page about what these things mean. So I just wanted to interject. I think that's great to really differentiate between those.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And we've all done this, right? I mean, we've gone into conversations with educators where we say personalization, and all of a sudden what's in their mind is like a jailbreak, or it's like somebody opened up the monkey cage at the zoo, and the apes are running amok in town, and it's scary to some people. And until you can provide a concrete common understanding and definition, it's all over the place, and then it is a jailbreak, and that's counterproductive. We don't get anywhere when that happens. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a way to also engage more people in the conversation, because some people just don't know, because they know the terms are used in different ways. They're not sure exactly how to engage in the conversation. So then they don't. So I think it engages more people by creating clarity, as well. So love it.
That's a great point. Yeah. And as we're moving into scale, right, and conversations about implementation, that's critical. You can't skip it. You can't skip that step, for sure. So moving through the categories, instruction is really what lesson giving qualities are built into the resource and built into the learning object. This is things like tutoring or feedback functions, or functions built into the resource that support the student's deeper understanding or exploration of the concepts. That's an important thing to consider as you're starting to identify resources. Mechanisms are really they're the digital structures that create a series of steps, right? It's the actions that the app is meant to do. It's built as a small system, it works in sequences or loops. The business model is actually very important, and it's something to consider more deeply. When we go into the standards, this is something that I'll refer to a little bit more. Even though we don't have a lot of time, it's a conversation that is necessary. This is the organizational model that defines the way in which the provider operates. Freemium is a great example. It's not free. It just isn't. Surprise. Somebody's picking up the money at some point. There's a business model tied to it, and that controls the experience or the utility of the resource. And you have to understand that if you're going to use those, if you're going to use building blocks, you have to understand the business model of those. Tied very closely to hostile characteristics. These are pitfalls that you want to understand and foresee before you start adding resources into your ecosystem and selecting those. You have to understand what hostile characteristics are. And then finally, the last category is really sort of a catch-all. It's terms and ideas that are important to understand as you start to select and use these resources. So here's a couple of examples of those definitions. The trigger. This is trigger procedures. It's a point in the system that the user gets to it. It performs a new function via the trigger. It's a feedback function. It's a layer sophistication that you want to start looking for. It's also kind of techy. And as a chief academic officer and learning, teaching and learning guy, I needed to pull my compatriot over from IT and go, help. Let's talk the same talk, and let's make sure that I'm clear on what we're talking about, and then make sure that you have the counterpart in that thought process on the technology side, so that we can start moving these things forward. Another example is gating. This is a gaming concept, right? And this is another sophisticated tool built within a learning object, or a resource that allows you to gate or maybe even ungate. So that you can personalize the experience, and so that students are not tied to time, pace, space, and place, because that's where we're headed when we're talking about personalization, is addressing each one of those things. And gating is a great example of a tool that can help with that personalization. Hostile characteristics, we talked about that. It's the little window that pops up in the middle of a fifth grade student's experience that has been carefully designed by a teacher that says, upgrade to platinum. And then all of a sudden 45 kids are clicking the upgrade to platinum, and they've gone down a rabbit hole, and getting them back is going to be hard. So understand if you're,
Chris,
yeah,
we only have about 3 minutes for you. We got to show video.
Whoa, 3 minutes. Holy smokes. Okay.
Yeah.
How time flies when we're having fun. Let's see. Okay. Modal, another example. I'm going to skip through those. You can read those. I want to cover in the last 3 minutes, standards for administrators. We're going to talk about standards for teachers and kids. And what I want to point out is that when you start to move through designing your system, the standards for professional practice are important. And administrators have those relative to management of digital curriculum and systems. Teachers have those, there we go. Teachers have those in terms of composition in systems for learning design and for student oversight. And there's a layer then for students that focuses on their responsibilities as they exercise student agency, and those are important to understand, because that's how you're going to start to build expectations and help people understand how we're going to do these things, and what my role, depending on where I am in the system, what my role is and what my responsibilities are. The last thing that we're going to talk about here is very briefly is a model. And as we start moving into personalization that leverages technology and is built around a learner, we have to start using a model that's designed for that. And there's two that are shown here. One is the Addy's model, fine model, right? It's 45 years old, and yet it's designed around the teacher, and it's designed around what teacher does. And it's primarily designed around planning for teaching, except that in reality, what we should be doing is planning for learning and designing for learning. And so we want to use a model that's created in that light, and the EduJedi model is. And so it takes the sort of the workflow, and it breaks it out into a couple of different categories, and you see those two rows there. One of them is the workflow logistics design section, and the other one is the discovery design section. One of those deals with how am I creating a system or an environment where learners are moving through using some logistics and some routing, and we have more fluidity in the learning experience. We're not tying kids down to seat time. We're not ensuring that what we're planning is sort of a lockstep movement through time, but much more organic. And then the other section of that is the discovery design, and this is really where we start to create systems that build student identity, student learner identity, and encourage and foster the exercise of student agency. And so I know that we have a very little bit of time to sort of draw some distinctions here, but I'll skip through some of those. So the EduJedi model is really different in a number of ways. So it detaches those assumptions of time and place and teacher centricity, and this is where we start getting to personalization, to real personalization, because now we're using those logistics models for navigation. It really allows for goal setting that isn't restricted to course or class. And we talked about that a little bit before, where we have to start breaking down those walls. And this is again, time, pace, place, and space. It provides for automated synchronicity between standards, pacing guides, and sort of teacher lesson calendaring and different parts of the experience. And so it allows for that. It really talks about a problem posed by the student or discovered by the student versus only by the instructional designer, and that, as we know, makes the learning sticky when students are artfully using higher level questioning. The learning is much more sticky. It really talks about and acknowledges that student discovery and the autonomy. So it deals with student agency in a very positive and powerful way, because we know that we have to increase student agency. So those are the major differences. I know that I'm running short on time, and that was a lot of information in sort of a rapid fire mode. But in the scant 2.5 minutes that we have, are there any thoughts on how this applies to your current situation or reactions to all of that?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask that people type those into chat, and we can try to come back to them later, only because it's time now for us to show a short video, and then get on with Dr. Don Phillips and Dr. Katrina McKellen, who are already online. Chris, wonderful job. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm going to start off with Carter Dunbar from ID Automation. We're going to talk to you guys a little bit about what's going on with identity, and particularly student identity, and what it means for the future. There's some big changes on the horizon. So Carter, if you can hear me, oh, good. You're good. I have you, and you're on video. Yeah.
Sorry, we're down here in Texas. We're battling, not having power and water. So it's a challenge, but I'm super excited to be able to hop on with you guys today.
Yeah, super excited to have you. So Carter, let's have you sort of kick that off. And just so you know, I'm going to show you on the screen right now. I do have slides that talk about part of the survey that was sponsored by Identity Automation, what's happening in the field.
Sure. Yeah. So, Lonnie, thank you for having me on today. What we are seeing in education it was a buildup over the past several years, but before COVID hit, it was really a voluntary effort by districts who were trying to lean into the future of moving towards different modalities and instruction. COVID changed all of that because it forced it upon everybody. And one of the phrases that I've heard you coin that I really love repeating is it's really forced time and space to warp in the new educational frontier and landscape. And so looking at kids moving from fully in person to fully remote to hybrid to pods to all of these different logistics that it takes to run an educational system today, keeping up with that from a digital access perspective is really difficult. And then beyond that, actually instructing once the access is there is just crazy. So I used to, as you know, Lonnie, I used to be a high school teacher myself. And so a lot of my former colleagues who I stay in touch with, I've been keeping in touch with them of, hey, what has this been like for you? And what I've been hearing is when they're having to shift from in-person to remote to back and all of that for a couple of days after a change has happened, on average, they're getting in maybe 20 minutes of instruction a day. The rest of the time is just trying to get kids online, make sure they know where they're trying to go, take attendance, all of these other tasks. And what we've done at Identity Automation is look at it from our background. So we were a cybersecurity company that was focused on identity and access management. And one of the trends that's happened in the cybersecurity space is this shift away from the traditional perimeter. So previously, you were just able to put up a firewall, retreat everybody inside your network and say, okay, now we're safe. With the shift to remote workforces, users being able to log in from anywhere, from any device, BYOD, at any time of day or night, the traditional perimeter is gone in security. Instruction now, it's a similar thing. Instead of saying you can get instruction as long as you're within these walls at this time and in this grouping, it doesn't work that way anymore. Like you said, time and space has been warped, but the only constant that's still there is that individual identity. And so your systems, your digital systems, need to be aware of who is this person, be it student, teacher, parent, whatever. Who is this person? What do they need access to? When do they need it? And what are they trying to do? So as long as we can understand the identity, we can not only provide the access they need, but then we can go into personalization of instruction and give them the actual materials and curriculum that they need to be successful.
Yeah, so much depth to that. This is really, I want to bring it back to where the teachers are at right now. So there's some teachers right now that are teaching from home and kids are in the class.
Yeah.
And, districts are sending in stand-ins to govern the class, so to speak. So the job is completely changed in numerous ways. And I think the worst part of it is worrying about who has access to what. Because you can't expect a student to complete their work if they didn't get the right PDF or the right application access. So
Right.
theirs was turned off for some weird reason. And it's all having to do with the complexity of rostering and everything else. So can I just show those data
Sure.
points really quick so everybody can be on the same page with us. And then I want to get into like what a true sort of sovereign identity would do. Because I think it's important to unload the workload of teachers. So I just made this real graph really quick after talking to you, showing like normally kids are putting grades in classes only, like that's the roster. It's really simple. Now you want to accumulate to that individual student all their grades, their good works. There's a little thing there like this one's got a gambling addiction. The stuff that they've used, I'm trying to liven it up, right? But he does banjo or whatever. But we did this national survey, a good split between the teacher ranks and the administration ranks, answering this national survey. And what we found was that school districts are saying 35% of kids aren't showing up anyway. This is a big problem. And it has to do with the core of access. Like, do they even know where they're supposed to go? Do they have an access point? And then 15% of the time they're given the wrong materials. So remember, a lot of teachers answered the survey. So they're like, yeah, they got the wrong stuff. So then I had to start over with that kid. But like, we need more complexity right now. No, we don't need any more complexity. So then 34% of the students can't easily navigate like that. That's not going to work. And then 15% of students nationally have opted out of re-enrollment. It's not actually probably full 15% because it was already at 27% opting out of traditional public. And then that 27% included charters. It's somewhere between 3.6 and this 15% nationally, because some districts are seeing lower loss of enrollment and some are seeing huge loss. So 51% of students have lost achievement, and 30% of teachers are saying can't easily navigate and use all this stuff. And then 47% unable to easily personalize. That's an access issue too. Like if you can easily just like dealing cards, it's better. of all your access to stuff. And then 40% of teachers are overly this is a biggie, into repetitive distribution and collection of assignments, resources, or communication. This is just killing teachers. This is like, it's just traffic. And then 74% of teachers are overwhelmed. Like that, those are the stats. So I'm going to go back to the main slide about you. So when you look at like what you're trying to solve here, it sort of boils down to the simplicity of this thing, right? Let's accumulate to the student more knowledge around their personal identity. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and if you're able to take the individual identity and the context that provides, the slide you had shown that talked about they didn't have access to the right materials, that's more than just being able to log into an application. So I think back when I was in the classroom and I would have a class of, say, 30 kids. If I have kids with IEPs, if I have ELL students, GT students, whatever the case may be, I can't teach them exactly the same. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. At least I can't do that and actually maximize their potential and give them the instruction and the education that they need. So when we're talking as far as hybrid logistics and things like that, if a student is in person with a teacher-led synchronous type modality, there are certain materials that are appropriate for that type of setting. However, if they move to an asynchronous model where they are remote and they don't have a teacher walking them through it, there's a whole different curriculum. There's a digital curriculum that needs to be required for that. It can't just be take my presentation that I had in class that I could talk through and answer questions for and just put that online. It's not digitizing. It's a whole different one.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing. I'm just checking a question here for a second. And then also, I had to turn a light on. My light went out here. All right, so Jill Gildia, let's make sure you can ask your question. I'm going to have Doug unmute you so you can go ahead and ask directly. Go ahead, Jill.
Thanks. So my question is a little bit looking at kind of this future, what might this future look like? What would you suggest for districts who are willing to move forward, but whose communities and families, especially in this time of COVID and pandemic, are really hanging on to tradition? They want to see just in-person learning back to regular, keep the classrooms as they are, don't require kids to wear masks. We don't care about this dumb virus. Let's just get back to what we consider normal, even including, a real traditional mindset or academy mindset towards having kids prepared in a way that they feel will be a pathway to, the traditional Ivy League universities. So how do you move a system that's kind of mired in the community holding it back?
Well, I think I want to answer, and I want Carter to answer too from his perspective, but my experience in 8 years of 30 city a year touring the country and talking to administrators and finding out what's going on out there in the real world of K-12, it's the wealthy districts that are the most resistant.
That would be true. That would be true.
Those parents succeeded in life, and they don't want to change the formula for their kids. So the language has to be different for that kind of a district than the disadvantaged ones, because they're like, I'll try anything, right? Like I'm all in, right? It's the wealthy ones that are the hardest. Like I know this from all over the country, just watching it happen. They're the most sort of like, so my opinion is that it has to be about opportunity. Individual opportunity. The words individualized and personalized and flexible scheduling, and my kid's gonna, complete 2 years of high school or 2 years of college and high school. Those are the things that appeal to that type of audience, and that means a break in the traditional structure. So what we're talking about with Carter here is the accumulation to that individual student, their favorite things. It's like tagging, when you're on social media, you tag stuff. So you tag the identity of the student so that it has a resonance within the greater infrastructure of the educational institution, and it can be used to totally personalize to that student. So in other words, the approach, Jill, has to be from that viewpoint of opportunity, personalized, individual, flexible. Let's use this pandemic to step up. We're going to come back, but we're going to come back differently. So if you do want to be here and you want to go blah, 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 it's great. But we're going to level up, just so you know. And that's really the way you have to communicate. Does that make sense, Jill?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Carter, you want to answer that too?
Yeah, you went pretty much the same place I was, which is it can't be mandated. The one size fits all approach is applicable for traditional education, but also for this modality as well. Anytime it's forced as a blanket on everyone, it's not going to be successful. But what it can be is an opportunity for those who want to take it. And Jill, what you're talking about is more of a cultural shift than a technological shift or anything like that. And so the proof is, instead of forcing it on them and making it something that they feel is reactive for them, it is, hey, here is a new approach that we are taking for anyone who wants to opt in and volunteer for it. And as people are doing that and they see the success that comes from it, others will want to follow and take advantage of that opportunity, and that platform's going to grow. It's already happened in some districts before COVID, and those are the districts that have been set up to make this shift and this pivot in a much more successful fashion. Really, when we talk about equity in education, we focus more on the lower end of the spectrum, be it socioeconomic, be it kids with special needs, and we absolutely need to focus on them. But at the same time, how many times has a GT kid been sitting in a classroom, finished their work in the first 5 minutes and told to put their head down for 40? Like, that's fantastic because they're not causing problems, but you're also not giving them an equitable opportunity to live up and maximize their potential. And really, when we look at the future of what technology can do to help aid the education system, that's really where I see the benefit is on both ends of the equity spectrum.
Yeah, interesting point, because I don't really hear people talking about that much, you know? Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, so I think really when we go back to what's really happening right now in education, I think even the disadvantaged school districts need to be talking about, how do I personalize, how do I individualize for every single student? Because the scary truth, and if I was a superintendent, I'd be saying this in front of my traditional parents who don't want anything to change. I'd be saying, listen, you know, it's a cold hard fact that for the last 100 years, every teacher in America, as golden hearted as they are, has been triaging those kids in the back of the room who didn't engage and were getting F's and everything. Were triaged out of the traditional system only because the teacher had to focus on a whole class mindset. I got to get the most through. And if I focus all my attention on those three, the other 27 aren't going to make it. You know, they're not going to get through. So that's the truth. And so now and nobody likes to admit it. And we say we all personalize and we've got remediation and blah, 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 blah. But the truth is, it's the disaggregation of the whole group is the future, so that it's 100% individualized, personalized, and that kind of thing. So that's why I think what you're doing technologically, Carter, is so critical, because you can't get there until you start accumulating more to the individual identity, and not just grades. Who cares about just like, here's my transcript, you know? It's just, you're laughing too. It's like, you know, here's me, but it's not. It's just a piece of paper with words on it. You know, I'm more than that.
Yeah, and it really hits me in a personal spot right now. Lonnie, you know my situation. We just had our first child.
I know, beautiful. I love the picture. Send me more.
You will do. When we're looking at, obviously, very, very early childhood schooling for them, the private schools, the different institutions, their whole selling point from a business standpoint is, oh, we'll have the smallest student teacher ratio so that they can focus just on your kid and give them what they need, but we'll also focus on whole child education. It won't just be academics. And this is what private schools, this is what charter schools, this is what all of your non-traditional approaches have been doing over the past couple of years. And that's why students have been flocking to them now that COVID's hit, is the business approach, the differentiator of, we will teach to your kid and make sure your kid is successful. traditional education, public schools haven't had to really go that approach full force because they haven't had the enrollment hit to necessitate it. But now with COVID, that kids are leaving the district and looking for that more individual attention. They're going to have to focus more like businesses and go after that differentiation and that value proposition of I can teach directly to your child in the way that your child needs it and care for more than just their academic growth. That's a powerful message. And that's a way to stay competitive.
Yeah, and I think it's resonant, and it's inevitable because look at Amazon. Like Uber can get you somebody nearby to drive over and pick you up. I mean, there's magic in the air, right? It's an amazing thing, and people are expecting it now. And so if you think you're going to remain traditional forever, that's not going to work. And this appeal of total personalization is like, oh, well, of course, that's what I want for my kid. Why can't you do everything I want, right? Like so. So I think the statement I want to make to the teacher crowd is that you're going to have to get used to the fact that the pandemic has essentially been the slow burn down of the idea of whole group. A whole group is going the way of the dodo bird. And you have to decide what you're going to be as a teacher. Are you a lecturer, leader of the sheep and the masses across the whole group spectrum? Let's go class. Or are you an instructor? Are you like there, eyeball to eyeball, or Zoom to Zoom call, and helping a kid unravel why they don't get fractions? Is that who you are? Like, this is an identity crisis for education, is what I'm saying. And so here you are, Carter, talking about identity management. And it's a perfect match. So what else do you want to say about kind of what identity automation is up to?
Sure. So one of the other shifts that's been happening this year is the curriculum side and the IT side have really been broken out of silos and started working together in some really innovative and cool ways. And at Identity Automation, that's what we're really here for. We want to be a part of the digital ecosystem, and we want to be supportive of everyone else. Traditionally, from an identity standpoint, the curriculum side has been concerned with single sign-on because that's the easiest access point to get to the applications. And that's fantastic. Single sign-on and application rostering is built upon a strong foundation of identity management and access management. And that's where identity automation really comes into play. We automate, we enforce security policies, and we make sure that all of your instruction is able to focus on instruction and not having to deal with those repetitive tasks that are pulling you away and really just frustrating and burning out teachers. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's great. Everyone needs single sign-on. I mean, single sign-on was sort of like the epiphany moment, stage one, right? Everybody needed that because they were looking around going, why do I have 5,000 apps for math? Like, what's happening? we can't log in all the seventh graders because all of them forget even 7-year-olds forget their username and password. But stage two is moving beyond that to full personalization and accumulation around the identity, additional information. So that when you take a look at that kid, you're like, oh, they're a banjo player and they're doing this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, good. Let's give them this stuff. That's a big difference, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, how many people have ever logged on to Amazon or logged on to Netflix and been like, man, Netflix knows me better than my wife knows me. It's like, you might like this. Yeah, I do like that, Netflix. You got that right. So there's no reason from an academic standpoint why we can't deliver the same thing within our single sign-on portals. Here's a student who may be struggling because they're uninterested in this certain aspect, but it finds something that they like, that they're interested in, and it fosters that desire to learn and just funnels supplemental curriculum to them. There's some really cool initiatives going on across the nation that we're lucky enough to be a part of. If anybody wants to look into like what Chicago Public Schools is doing with their curriculum equity initiative, there's some really, really interesting stuff that's happening of making the digital ecosystem interoperable with each other, providing culturally relevant curriculum and instruction to the individual student, but all of that is built upon the foundation of identity, access, and automation. That's what it has to be built upon. And so if that's something that districts need, we're definitely here to help.
Yeah, and I love the whole workflow idealization behind that. Because if there's one thing that's really killing teachers right now, it's the digital workflow. People always think, like, oh, we're going digital, things will be easier. Yeah, it's supposed to be. But you're dealing with the world of knowledge and children and individual humans running around, and it's really complex. I mean, you used to be in a classroom, you'd pass out papers to the front of the row and they'd all pass them behind them to the kids behind them. And then you would hold this sort of lecture thing, and then it was like a test goes out. It was all sort of dynamic in the classroom. And now you send stuff out, and then, oops, I got to send an email to little Johnny because he needs this extra PDF. And now some parent traffic is hitting you, and they're like, what's going on with my kid? And then you got to, I got to collect all of the things from all the kids and then issue the next set of things. And any way that digital traffic can be streamlined should be really listened to by institutions as well as teachers. Teachers should be pushing for this because the traffic's killing them. And most of them will admit it. It's like, oh my gosh, if I have to send out another email or put something else in the learning management system just for people to figure out where they're supposed to go and spend less time directing attention to where the folders are, that would be great, So I'm excited about what you're doing, Carter, because I think it's pivotal, but it's not going to be easy to get people to understand why. They're going to be like, yeah, I just need this math thing. So,
Yeah, we're excited about where we're going as well. And Lonnie, we appreciate the time you're giving us here and also just the insight you've been providing us along this journey. So we're happy for you to be a part of it.
Yeah. Do you want to mention you have a white paper up on our site now?
We do. So we have a white paper that is up talking about identity-infused education. And it's really going more in depth on the concepts that we're talking about here with some stair-step approach of how districts can go about getting to that point and what it really looks like if you're able to leverage this information of an identity and put it into the educational process.
Beautiful. So people, go to the learningcouncil.com website under papers. You'll find that and you can reach out to Carter anytime. So we're going to be providing you, Carter, you might want to type into chat right now your email and contact info if you can.